So Trudi, over to you. So what does BRIC mean for Africa? And from your experience also in South Africa, what are the benefits countries can take from there? What do you see as key contributions going forward?
Thank you for that, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think looking at it from a South African and African perspective, our economies have integrated into the world economy in difficult and sometimes complicated ways. I mean, Africa has been a marginalized continent in terms of contribution to trade, in terms of investment flows. And so I think when BRICS came along, it promised the possibility of having a different kind of global economic cooperation that didn't have the legacy of the historical relationship that African economies have had with the global economy typically. I mean, I think we all know the history in terms of being a continent that has been extracted from, a continent that is dependent in many ways on the global economy, and a continent that also had very difficult relationships with Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank, IMF. If you think back to the 80s, a lot of the debates around structural adjustment, a lot of the debates about the world dictating to African economies economic policy without fully understanding African realities. So I think the idea of an alternative to that and a different way of trading and investment has been very attractive. Of course, South Africa was the first country that benefited from BRICS expansion in terms of being invited to join the bloc a year after BRIC formed to become BRICS. And at the time, so quite soon after the global financial crisis, it also promised a way to recover with a different set of economies. I think if we look at the experience since then in terms of that promise, the BRICS has grown to be quite sophisticated. You see it in their communiques, lots of ambition around trading amongst each other, investing in each other's economies. Now, if I become very specific to the South African experience, if we look at the trade perspective, we export mostly, in the BRICS configuration, mostly to China, but also to a certain extent we enjoy good relations with Brazil, India, less so in terms of exports and trade with Russia, but still quite present. And we find that the trade balance on the whole has been against South Africa, so we're running a deficit against the BRICS nations, in particular the main trading partner there being China. And we also find that a lot of the exports that we send to the BRICS bloc remain commodities with very low value added, and they also tend to have very cyclical price cycles. So then the question becomes, have we really changed the quality fundamentally of the trade? So you'd have seen in recent times a lot of the advocacy from South Africa to the BRICS nations has been, how do we close the trade gap and try to move towards a more balanced trade to narrow the deficit in essence? And also, how do we move away from commodities to more value-added products? So in a sense, I can say that in terms of providing options, the BRICS has been very important. But when it comes to some of the fundamental structural changes that we want to see in the way Africa engages with the rest of the world, that is still very much a work in progress. If I think of it from then a foreign direct investment perspective, we've seen South African companies invest in the rest of the BRICS, notable investments, for instance, Naspers, one of the major media conglomerates coming out of South Africa, is well invested in Brazil, in Russia, Discovery Holdings in China. You know, one could go on with a few, and vice versa. And with the prospects of BRICS expansion, we see countries like Saudi Arabia, for instance, being quite active also in terms of inward investment into South Africa and into the continent. So you talked about energy earlier, which is quite interesting in terms of oil and gas. But if you look at South Africa in terms of renewable energy, the biggest renewable energy investment in South Africa is actually from Aqua Power, Saudi headquartered, a 100 megawatt plant. So there are also those new energy partnerships that are forming that promise to create a sense of cohesion and independence within the bloc. From a development finance perspective, if we think about the new development bank and what it means for infrastructure, or the Brics Bank, as it's often called, it has really been one of the successes of the Brics in terms of creating a new institution from scratch, and an institution that can hold its own, much smaller still than the World Bank, but can hold its own in terms of advancing loans to African countries and other countries for infrastructure. So if I had to summarize, I would say Brics is giving options. Expansion is deepening those options, but it's important that this is constructive optionality that really changes the structure of how Africa is integrated into the rest of the economy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Trudi. And I think this perspective of optionality, I think, plays an important role, not only for South Africa, but also for Brazil.